The show starts 100 years ago with a person named Thomas Shelby, where walking around his horse in Birmingham City. It seems clear that all the city's population is afraid, fits none, away from his way. We know that Thomas Shelby and his brothers are big gang leaders and known as the Peaky Blinders. Thomas and his sisters recently returned to the city after serving them in the British Army during the First World War. Of course, the bodies and blood that they saw in the war affected all of them and changed. And the more affected by war was Thomas. He became a silent person, not speaking much, and he loves isolation and unity. War made him so violent that he tries to stick and control himself all the time. The biggest brother of Thomas, Arthur Shelby, claims is the official leader of the gang, but it was just an interface in front of people, while the actual leader of the gang is Thomas. Then we see a meeting of the Shelby family, where Thomas and his brother Arthur present, as well as their sister Ada Shelby, in addition to Aunt Polly, who also participates in the meeting. We find out that Polly was the one who cared about all things while men in war, and they were considered a fundamental person in the family and the gang, and her words were effective on everyone. The reason for this meeting is that Arthur heard about the coming of a large police inspector named Campbell to their city, and came directly from the British government itself. And when Thomas knows about it, he feels some confusion. You notice Aunt Polly's association, but she doesn't say anything.
After the meeting, Polly Thomas calls for a private talk, and she says she's sure he's hiding something from them, and he asks him to tell her what he's hiding. Thomas recognizes her that several days ago he sent a group of men to steal goods from the port, but his men were drunk. Instead of stealing the goods, they told them stole funds belonging to the British government. It was not ordinary funds, but it was full of a large number of government weapons and ammunition. He tells her that Inspector Campbell, who came to the city, came to investigate the stolen weapons case. When Polly learned that, he was angry and slapped Thomas, then asking him if he had rid of those weapons and threw them, or she still had it. Tell her she still has, and he's hiding her in an old store. Polly ordered them to throw those weapons nearby to the police station until the police found them and no problems were caused. But Thomas reassured her, says he will get rid of weapons in a few days, and confirms that the problem will solve.
Meanwhile, we see Ada, Sister Thomas, and she goes to meet her boyfriend named Freddie. They show that they have a secret relationship that no one knows because Freddie is believed in communist thought, and there are many differences between him and the Ada brothers, especially Thomas. If her brothers knew this relationship, they would be spending on her and Freddie too. Because of her love, she was linked to her secretly, and she believed she loved her too. But in fact, Freddie was fooling her. He just got her to know her brothers and news of the gang, no more.
The next day, Inspector Campbell arrives to the city police department, and he talks to the officers there to tell them that he will be their boss during this period. Campbell talks with them with a harsh and arrogant accent because they used to take bribes of gangsters and criminals, leaving the city soaked in corruption. And they say that Campbell is over and they are what they do with him. They will commit themselves to his orders and they will stop all they do before they come. As they tell them he brought a new group of soldiers to serve him because he does not trust any of them. After he finished his conversation, they order them to begin work immediately, and it seems clear that he is a very strict person.
Then we see a group of Campbell soldiers, and they go to catch Arthur, and then they take him to a deserted place and start beating him and torture. After they're done with his torture, Campbell comes to meet him, and he knows himself. He asks him about the robbery and the place of weapons stolen from the government because Campbell was quite sure that the Peaky Blinders was responsible for stealing weapons. That's why his soldiers sent his soldiers to bring the gang leader, and he thinks Arthur is the leader. Well, Arthur doesn't know that Arthur is just an interface and that the real commander is Thomas. Campbell still asks Arthur about the place of weapons, but Arthur repeats that he doesn't know anything. And with Campbell can realize that Arthur does not lie, and he actually does not know anything about that robbery. This is why Campbell is offering Arthur to cooperate and his gang with him to find weapons as soon as possible. It is explained that if he does not cooperate, they will all be spent in the sight of them. Then he left him Campbell and he goes away.
Then see Thomas, and he goes to buy a bottle of alcohol from the bar located in the city.
There is a new girl who started working at the bar called Grace. Verbal Thomas in her beauty and wondered about what a girl came to this beauty to a city full of corruption like this, but also working in a bar. But it doesn't look great. Take her the bottle and walk away. Thomas had taken that bottle to Arthur after he returned to them and was in a very bad case as he had suffered. Arthur tells them everything that happened with him, and he asks his brothers if someone knows something about the robbery. Yet Thomas is committed to silence and does not tell them that he stole weapons. And he remains silent until the end of the meeting.
At night, Thomas goes to his men and tells them that he was not the plan. He had previously ordered them to throw weapons nearby by the police department as Paulie, but he had amended his opinion and ordered them to leave the weapons in the store and not to get rid of them. One of his men opposes him and says that the government sent a strong inspector and a large number of soldiers to find these weapons, and the idea of keeping it will not pass as he thinks. But Thomas remains insisting on his mind to keep weapons and then leave them apart. The next day, we see Inspector Campbell, and he goes to meet Grace, which began its new work in the bar. It is clear that it works for him, and he sent it to that bar to come near gangs and criminals and convey to him the news. Campbell asks if she has yet known something. She has been answering her still trying to adapt to her new work, and she has yet to reach any information. But she feels that Thomas is the one who controls the Peaky Blinders gang, and that he is the real leader, not his older brother, as some believe, because Arthur is stupid and does not fit to be a leader. Grace adds that she will try to watch Thomas and find out more about him. She says Campbell not to forget to report him any new discovery, and then leave her.
At night, Peaky Thomas calls and asked him if he had rid of weapons as I asked him. He did the right thing and left it. The next day, Arthur and Thomas goes and the rest of their brothers to meet another gang in the region because of an old disagreement among them. He was supposed to take his brothers with him to solve this disagreement. When they meet the other gang, dialogue begins, but one of the second gang members speaks to Arthur in an inappropriate manner, reduces him, saying that he was just a little bit of seeking his younger brother. Then we all have a fight. Thomas and his brothers can overcome other gang members and beat them.
After they are done, they all come back to the city, find that the police have broken all the city houses and inspected their parents, trying to find any trace of weapons. But of course, they tried to fail, because Thomas was hiding weapons in the store. At that time, the Peaky Blinders held a meeting because of what the police did to people, since most of the city were paying money to the gang for their protection, more like a fraternity. What the police did may weaken the reputation of the gang and make people not afraid of them and do not pay them anymore. Thomas told them he would solve this problem himself, and he would want the hit to Inspector Campbell as soon as possible, then leave them and go.
Thomas ordered his men to collect all the pictures of the king in the city and then take those pictures and burn them and call a journalist to take pictures of what's going on. The journalist must write that the people of the city are the ones who did it, and they did this in protest against what the police did to them. The next day, news spreads in the newspapers, and it's messy. Campbell is surprised by a phone call from the minister, who speaks with him sharply about what happened. The minister will be forced to do what he did in the city and what he was arranged, and then he will not repeat what he did again because it may cause a revolution, and they do not want it. The minister's style of speaking with him is narrowed, but he has no choice but to agree on his orders in silence. And then Campbell starts to think about the person who might be behind what happened. And Grace remembers that Thomas is the real leader of the Peaky Blinders, and it concludes that Arthur is a fool and cannot be behind such a movement. Here the actual war begins between Campbell and Thomas Shelby.
Meanwhile, Thomas was walking around his horse in the city, and he called Grace on the road and stopped him to ask him something. Tell him she's glorifying singing and loving him so much, and you want him to let her sing in the bar because everything that happens in the city is done, and he had prevented singing their final. Fiji Thomas would think about it later,
but he is now asking her to buy a new dress because she is invited to attend a big party that will be held at the end of the week and wants her to be present. And here it seems clear that Thomas began to admire it, although since he returned from the war, he lives in full isolation and did not come near any woman, but he feels that Grace is different and begins to attract an approach to her. At that time, Polly is sitting with Ada and talking to her, and you notice that Ada seems afraid of something and hiding something. Polly asked her to tell her what she was hiding, and she recognized that she was pregnant in her 2nd month, and she was afraid of her brother's reaction when they knew about it, afraid that there was a big problem. Polly asked her about the baby's father she had, but Ada refused to tell her who he was. Then Polly goes to call Thomas and tell him what Ada knew. Thomas is angry and goes straight to face Ada, asking her about the identity of the child's father. You feel scared of him and tell him Freddie is the father. Thomas is angry more and feel tight, but he tries to stick and leave it in part. Then tell Polly what he knows, and she says to leave it to her and she'll act in it. Fred Thomas said that if you can't solve the subject, then you have to tell him, because then he will act himself, a judge that he will kill Ada and Freddie together. Then Polly warns him and fight him and hit him, and they are very serious. The next day, we see Thomas, and he's going to meet Inspector Campbell after he called him. At first, Campbell gives his intelligence and what he did to him, and the police he put in with the minister. Thomas recognizes him with confidence that he did it, but also recognizes that the weapons he looks for exist and that no one can reach it except for his permission. He then tells him he has conditions for the return of those weapons and that he has no choice but to listen to the conditions and approval. Thomas begins to mention his terms, saying that the first requirement is not to break into home soldiers again and not to be subjected to anyone from the city, because the city's people are under protection and protection of the Peaky Blinders gang. No one is approaching or from any of his gang. If any of his or her family had happened, those weapons would be sent to the Irish army, at that time the largest enemies of the English government, and the arms between their hands would jeopardize the great English government. Campbell was listening to all requests, and threats of Thomas were shocked by his dare, and eventually he had to approve all that if he had nothing else to do. Then Thomas goes to talk to Polly and tell him she found a solution to the problem of Ada and Freddie, and the solution is to run together in time without anyone feeling it. At first, Thomas is satisfied with this idea, but they have no other solution but that. At the same time, Campbell goes to Grace and tells her that her words were true, and that Thomas is behind everything. That's why it gives her a thing to come near Thomas so much to know where the weapons are. Grace agrees with it and begins to come closer to Thomas, go to the bar and sit with him and start talking and learn. Over time, it turns out to have the extent of Thomas's crash from the inside, and that no real feelings, despite the power shown in front of people, it is very fragile from the inside. Here, Grace begins to admire him and feel attracted to him, and this admiration is quite far from the mission that Campbell has ordered. The next day, Polly goes to Freddie and Ada to the train station until he travels and leaves the city. But Freddie refuses to travel and tell Polly that he will marry Ada and live with her in this city and will not leave her. When Polly returns to Thomas and tell him what happened, Thomas is so angry and feels that Freddie challenged him and decides to go to face him and deal with him in his own way. But Polly is trying to calm him down and ask him to give her another chance to get it up. And he confirms that if it doesn't work this time, you'll let him act himself. Polly goes to Freddie and Ida, giving them a great amount of money to travel and start their lives away from the city. Freddie tells Polly that this is his last chance to remain alive and advise him that if he does not do that, she is not responsible for what Thomas will do, and then leave them. Meanwhile, Thomas goes to talk to Arthur after he knew he was sitting alone so sad, asking Thomas about his problem and the reason he made him so sad. He is not interested, and that he is not respected or appreciated, and that he is the last person who knows everything, and everyone sees him stupid, and they do not take his opinion in any order. Thomas tries to equate and fix it,
and he tells him that he is the most important person in the gang, but the current circumstances are difficult to everyone, and confirms that he will remain the leader of the Peaky Blinders, whatever happened and under any circumstances. After that, Thomas buys his brother Arthur's bar to explain, since Arthur was hoping for a time that he had a special bar. Thomas decided to bring him this dream as trying to get him out of his bad condition. Thomas leaves him celebrating the new bar, and then he goes to meet Freddy after he asked for his last meeting. When he meets, Freddy begins to give Thomas the money that Polly had given him to travel. Then he munts his gun and he directs him to Thomas, saying he does not want his money and he will not travel, but he will marry Ida and will stay with her in the city. He is told that he knows him well and knows his intentions, and he wants to marry Ida and close to him to become a gang member, but he confirms that this will never happen and that he will not be a member of the Peaky Blinders family. Then Thomas leaves him and he goes away. Thomas goes to Polly and tells her what happened with Freddy and confirms that from that moment she has no relationship anymore and that he will handle it himself. The next day, Thomas gets ready and takes Grace to attend the ceremony as I have already promised. Grace was wearing a pretty elegant dress and looked so beautiful, which had increased by Thomas's admiration. They go together to the party and have fun together.
The next day, we see Thomas and his brothers, and they're coming home to find out that the house was stolen during their absence. It is clear that whoever stole them were gang members who had Thomas and Arthur had been used to them before. Although Thomas and his brothers were upset, Thomas decided to deal with the situation with intelligence. He went to meet the leader of that gang and talked to her without raising problems, and he offered her to return everything they stole from their house, for there is no Saddam among them, but in reverse, it is prepared by solving existing differences and alliance together. To demonstrate the true faith of his intentions and ensure that no betrayal is made for their part, he tells her that he has a single brother, and this brother is ready to marry one of her daughters. And of course, if marriage is done, there will be no problems between them and will be permanent allies. The gang leader agrees to Thomas's offer. She also does not want problems, and her alliance with the Peaky Blinders gang is a great gain for them.
When the night solves, Thomas goes to talk to Inspector Campbell about Freddy because Campbell wants to arrest Freddy for being a communist thought, which was illegal at that time. Thomas offered to provide him with the largest communist personality in the city for the sake of ignoring the idea of being Freddy's arrest. Initially, the Campbell refuses the offer, but eventually he agrees. Before he goes away, Campbell Thomas asks for the delivery date of weapons. He's just saying he'll hand it when he's making sure that all his claims have been checked, and then he'll just hand it over.
The next day, Thomas sees his entire family to inform them of important expertise, which they have received a formal certificate from the government allowing them to establish legal horses races. They were previously staying in these races and betrayed them illegally, and now, thanks to Thomas and his deal with Inspector Campbell, they were able to obtain a formal license allowing them to exercise these races without any problems.
Thomas goes to meet Grace, and he has to work with him as his assistant after his work became legal and licensed, and they can publicly exercise it in front of everyone. Grace agrees directly to Thomas's offer, especially that they had begun to fall in love with each other. As a matter of days, we see Thomas, and he takes his brothers to visit the other gang in order to marry his single brother from one of their daughters. Indeed, they are married and they are officially allies, and they are celebrating together on this occasion. But suddenly, during the celebration, Ida feels that she will be born. Everyone's rushing home to breed there. During the birth, Thomas decides to call Freddy to be present at this time. And indeed, Freddy comes and brings birth, and Ida has a child as a male. He has very joy. However, the joy is not complete, as the police suddenly arrive at the place and arrested Freddy, despite the Thomas agreement with Campbell agreement. But the officers are breaking in and arrest him, while Thomas is unable to do nothing.
At that moment, Polly's angry and beating Thomas because she thinks it was a trap of being trained to catch Freddy.
But Thomas didn't know anything, and he didn't know how police or Inspector Campbell arrived until Freddie was in their house. Here we find out that Grace was the one who told the police at Freddie's place, making them come to catch him. Passing days see Grace and she works help for Thomas, where the accounts were administered as requested. Despite what happened, Thomas never doubted, because he loved and trusted her, but made her responsible for all the gang accounts. While Grace had audited, it noticed that there were regular financial sums to someone who was supposed to be killed by the Peaky Blinders themselves. It seemed strange to her and raised her curiosity, and I decided to investigate it herself. To understand more, I went to talk to the most naive person in the gang, Arthur, who did not pay attention to her flee the word and tell her that the gang had Z'd death of this person, and he was still alive. And so Grace begins to think, if the man is alive, who buried his place? And with its intelligence, you can conclude that weapons may be hidden in the grave of this person.
And indeed, Grace goes to Campbell and tell him what I discovered, and explain to him its conclusion. Campbell immediately moves with a group of soldiers to the grave of that man, and they order them to dig there. Indeed, they find weapons. Here he feels great pleasure because finally completed the task that was sent by the government specifically for her. After the task, Campbell goes to talk to Grace and tell her he loved her from the beginning, but he couldn't explain his feelings before the case was resolved. Then, she's officially offered marriage. But Grace refuses to offer him very politely and tell him he deserves a better woman than her. However, Campbell didn't accept her rejection. She asked her if she refused to refuse her because she fell in love with Thomas. Then
Campbell is determined to arrest Thomas in the argument that he exercises illegal activities with his gang. Take a bunch of soldiers and head to catch him. But Grace goes to Thomas and help him escape before Campbell and soldiers arrive. When that task fails, Campbell decides to take weapons and withdraw Grace and the Peaky Blinders gang about his accounts. Days see Thomas with his brothers and has established a legal firm among them, so there is no way they owe them, and to ensure that they walk on the clean road. Then Thomas brings the family and tells them that he also announced that he decided to smuggle Freddie from prison, wanting him to reconciliation Ida and Polly, who were so angry at him and still think that he was the real reason behind Freddie's prison.
Thomas is already freeing Freddie while he's in the car, then goes to Grace and admits her love, exchanging it recognition, and agree to live together forever. And suddenly, the author cut this moment to tell Thomas that there's another gang in the area coming to attack them. This gang, led by a man named Billy, who was responsible for horse racing in the city before the Peaky Blinders took everything from him after they got the official certificate of horses races. Billy now came in his men to avenge them. And suddenly, Campbell is the one who stands behind him and supports him. But he is carrying him with all the weapons he needs to eliminate the Peaky Blinders gang. Campbell also goes to talk to the officer responsible for the city and ordered him not to interfere in the battle that will fall between the gangs no matter what happens. Indeed, Billy and his gang headed there, while Thomas and Arthur had gathered all gang members, including Freddie, who now became one of them. Then they go to Billy and his men, and the Peaky Blinders tries to solve it in a friendly way without entering into a conflict, but Billy refuses to reach any settlement and shoot Thomas. Yet Thomas is fighting injury, being used to such wounds because of the war he participated. Thomas and shoot Billy, kill him immediately, and turn to the Billy gang and order them to leave, confirming that he will not hurt them but will provide them protection. Then they throw their weapons and walk, to end up with the least losses without a big fight as expected. And then Peaky Blinders takes Thomas to get the bullet out of his body and treat him. Meanwhile, Campbell knows what happened, and he was incredibly shocked that Peaky Blinders managed to survive again. He was getting more angry and put them in his eyes. Meanwhile, the gang meets and celebrate Billy's death and all the successes they have achieved since no one has ever been competing for them, nor in any other area. So they consider themselves to control the entire city with all of it. From that moment, there are no longer anyone who can stand in their face or in front of their ambitions, which are still extended to the next seasons.